And here's the things that Democracy Now! Will never talk about. And this is central to the entire thing, that while the progressive forces of Russia, including the Communist Party, were begging Putin to help the people of the Donbass who are getting murdered by the neo-Nazi coup government daily, he was not even recognizing Donbass as sovereign nations, right? He was trying for a peace process that would appease NATO in the West, right? By keeping them within Ukraine. When that didn't work, and when the Nazis were ramping up for what looked like an extermination of the Donbass, that is the day the special military operation began. And that's what's often left out.
Yeah.
And just for any first-time watchers, we've talked about this so many times. Like, we literally talk about it every day. So if we leave any details, literally go to any other video that we have, type in Midwestern Marx Ukraine, and you'll see a million videos of us talking about this, because we've literally done it a bunch of times. So I think we can try to get this conversation going without hitting on every detail. But if we do miss some and you want to learn more, if you're a first-time viewer, about our views on Ukraine, there's plenty of places you can go to watch them.
And check out what we've published on our website, because we published some solid freaking and damning articles of NATO and the U.S., like Baxter Dimitri's article about Project Aerodynamic, where the CIA has been propping up neo-Nazis in Ukraine since the end of World War II. But, thank you so much, Andrew Ray, for the awesome $5 super chat. Really appreciate you for that. Great question, too. Really stimulating question here. I've been a Larivo voter for a while. I'm voting Cornel this time. Awesome. I believe Carlos voted for Larivo in 2020 as well. Mm-hmm. What would you say to convince someone to vote West instead of Larivo? Well, what we're hoping for right now is that they do a combined ticket or something.
Yes.
That PSL endorses Cornel West and maybe even put Larivo on the vice president. Unless they can find someone else who's more of a name. Because Lariva is a huge name among Marxist-Leninists and socialists and anti-imperialists. If they can find someone who's in line with that, in line with our values, but who has a bigger name amongst regular Americans, maybe. But I hope PSL endorses. I hope CPUSA endorses, because, and I always bring up the Bolivarian Revolution when we're talking about this. That was basically what happened with Chavez, was all the different socialist and communist parties in Venezuela got behind him and organized for him, and then continually pushed him into a more and more socialistic, anti-imperialist position once he got in office. So I'm hoping that's what PSL and them see the opportunity for. And I mean, I'd be interested in hearing your reasons, Andrew, why you're voting for Cornel West instead of Lariva, but I think it's just a great moment. Lariva basically was running for president with knowing that she wasn't going to win, but just to get anti-imperialist ideas out there. Cornel West is a big name, and he has, the ability to attract more attention to the same ideals that Lariva stands for. So I think it's just a matter of strategy this year.
You bring up something really important, Eddie, and it brings it back to the purity fetish and those who are foreclosing even the notion of building a coalition around this. If we don't do that, we can't push things in a more Marxist, materialist, revolutionary direction. We don't have a say. If we put ourselves against them, it's just being a weapon on behalf of the establishment at that point, right? But if we work to create a real coalition and coalesce around what's already arising in reality, just as Marx and Engels coalesced around the Paris Commune after saying they shouldn't revolt, that something amazing can happen, and we can be an active part of that.
Conquest, the Alexander the Great, associated with a grand empire. So that in that regard, there's no doubt in my mind that the expansion of NATO has played a crucial role in the wounded Russian Empire with all of its repression, all of its regimentation. Let us never forget about the thousands of Russian brothers and sisters who are going to jail in opposition to gangster Putin's criminal invasion. but he's pushed against the wall and he responds. That's how heads of empire respond. So we've got to be in solidarity with the suffering of Ukrainian brothers and sisters, but we have to recognize NATO is a instrument of American imperial foreign policy. We've seen it over and over again, and so we're witnessing a proxy war. There must be a ceasefire. There must be a stopping of that war. Why? We're on the road to nuclear.
And I agree with what Maria said, that the demonizing of Putin isn't great because it lends itself to Western propaganda. But ultimately, his opinions on Russia don't matter too much because he's not going to be governing Russia. He's going to be governing, hopefully, America. And as long as he's against NATO and he wants to move America towards peace, to do what needs to be done to move America towards peace, he's in the correct position as far as that goes. He's not completely ideologically in line with us because of the reasons that I mentioned. He's lending his voice to some of the imperial propaganda against Russia, but he's also ultimately correct on the policy that what needs to be done from an American perspective is to move towards a peace plan before we get closer to nuclear war, and to realize that NATO is an imperialist instrument that put us in this situation in the first place. He should have mentioned the coup, though. It upsets me that he doesn't mention the coup, and I know that's a thing where he's scared, of the backlash that he's going to get from people who watch Democracy Now! If he mentions the coup. And it's like, dude, you gotta draw that line, though. You gotta point out the coup because that's such a pivotal thing in this event. And like a lot of Americans, you could probably change their mind on it if they don't already know that the coup happened. You could educate them on this. So I hope that he starts bringing up the Maidan coup. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
I don't know if he. I don't see him being someone who, if he thinks something is correct, he wouldn't say it because he's scared. So I think, Cornel West has been around for a very long time. He's part of, as Maria said, the democratic socialist tradition that has held deep anti-Soviet and anti-China prejudices. Anything that smells like a communist party and a dictatorship of the proletariat, they see as undemocratic and authoritarian. And those are just facts. Those are contradictions that we have to tarry with. I mean, we have to disagree with him on that whenever he brings it up. Do it hopefully in a comradely manner, not a dismissive and condemnational tone. See if there's potential to change his mind on those issues. But, even with that, we're so backwards in our position in the class struggle and socialist politics that it still leaps and bounds ahead of everything else, and that's what makes it difficult. That we have to support it. I don't think we should ignore these bad things, and we're not doing it right now. We're very clear about the need to support West, but also pointing out the inconsistencies and contradictions within his worldview. And I'd like to know, does he if does he think that bastardizing Russia and Putin and feeding into this demonizational narrative, what role does that play in like his discussion against intervention? Like, is that really the positive force that I think he might think it is? I don't think it brings up any nuance at all. Because in order to have, I think, a correct interpretation of the war that pushes more people against intervention, you can't participate in this, bastardization of Putin as if his actions weren't, fully rational. I struggle to think that he can't do the good parts that he's proposing in terms of non-intervention without having to add the bad parts. I think, especially after I think more than half of the population is against the proxy war. A lot of favorability numbers for RFK, who doesn't speak like this, for Trump, who I'm sorry to say it, but Trump doesn't speak like this about Russia. He doesn't call Putin a gangster. No, at least I haven't seen it. He calls him the opposite. He calls him a very smart man or something like that. And we don't
He
even
said he
have
made
them.
a horrible mistake in launching the intervention.
Right, but that's not a dehumanization of Putin or a demonization of him. And so
I think
especially with the amount of people that agree with Trump and RFK on this issue, I don't think Cornel West is winning any people over by trying to have this sort of fake nuance of
Right, and that's what makes me mad is I feel like he's appealing to the Democracy Now viewers with that, and it's like I was saying, it's like Cornel, you don't need to do that. You don't need to appeal to those people. Those people aren't what's going to win you this election. Those aren't the people we're trying to bring on board. So, and I also want to say, like, this is where the purity fetish is important because you can critique Cornel without throwing him in the dumpster as a human.
Absolutely.
You know, that's exactly who he's appealing to, Eddie. He's appealing to the purity fetish left here. What he's trying to do is bring those sort of remnants of the middle class activist NGO left into an alignment with the majority of the working class who are against the war. And he's trying to walk this line. But in this, the way the propaganda has been set up, when you demonize Putin, it's going to play into people's minds. Well, who cares? He's a gangster, right? That's the way people view these things nowadays. And I think it's just one of his weaknesses that when a proper coalition forms around this with, you know, communists and organizations like the Midwestern Marx Institute, hopefully right in there walking arm in arm with them, those weaknesses can be overcome because they're where we are strong.
Sounds like something a Putinist settler would say.
Oh, it is.
I'm on Noah's ass today calling him a settler. Do you guys want to watch a little more of this, or do you want to save the rest of the video for later?
You know what's really funny?
What?
I'm not even a settler, really. Like both
Right.
like my grandparents are immigrants.
Right. That's why I like calling you a settler even more. That's one of my favorite parts.
Anytime people said that to me, I was like, "Ooh, thank you so much for trying to guess my blood quantum, but you got it wrong."
I would be that one guy, the decolonization guy on Twitter, who said they were going to send me back to Europe, even though I've never been out of America in my life. I guess I'm going to go back, but I'd kind of be down to go to Ireland. I would just meet up with Claire Daly and Mick Wallace right away. I would be like, let's go. Like, in America, we have so many people to organize. This damn country is so big. Ireland, that's like organizing a state, basically. I'm down.
Yeah. I got actually going there this summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
really wish I could go because I know I talk about my dad's family who's from the Soviet Union a lot, but my mom's family is from Ireland, and they're from Cork, and that's exactly where he's going. And there were definitely some real provos still in action down there.
You know what's sad about these decolonization guys? Their profile pictures are usually like Sankara, which it's kind of like the Maoists. Like, do you really think that the person you claim to whose ideas you claim to be representing wouldn't think you're a complete fucking idiot?
Absolutely. Most of the decolonization people are anonymous too, which is also a little bit sketchy. But no, I know you got to get going soon. Do you want to play any more of this video, or are you gonna?
Yeah, we can keep going a little bit.
All right, we'll just go a few more minutes here. Maybe the next question.
War. That's the last thing we want to see, my dear sister.
And as president, what exactly would you do to stop that war?
Oh, one is I would pull back on the U.S. military support. I would sit down with the elites from the Chinese empire, given all of their forms of regimentation. And
You ruined it. That was actually a good question by Amy Goodman for once. But how can you call China an empire, Cornel?
It's a fucking roller coaster.
Elites too.
It is. It's a roller coaster.
It's like that meme of the audience, and they're like, ah, and then It's exactly what it is.
I was watching an interview, and I think it was with John Swartzwelder, who is a lead writer for The Simpsons and a brilliant author of hilarious fiction books about, they're like fake hard-boiled detective novels. Fantastic. But anyway, they were asking him sort of how he writes Homer Simpson. And they're like, well, and he's like, well, I write him like a dog, right? Like a dog sees a ball and he's the happiest dog you've ever seen. And then the ball rolls under the table and he can't reach it. And he's the saddest dog you've ever seen. And then someone pushes it back out and he's the happiest dog you've ever seen.
I want to say something I said last time too, in that we support Cornel because he's the political candidate in the race this year who is better than all of the other candidates. But we are an educational institute who is focused on training people ideologically. So it's our job, literally, to deconstruct these for you guys, our audience, and point out where he's being ideologically inconsistent or we believe he's being ideologically wrong. Because of, not falling into the purity fetish, we still support this candidate. We still want you to get this behind this candidate. We would like, if you want to push our ideological line on this candidate and his followers, we think that would be good too. But I just think it's so valuable to understand that we can support this guy ultimately because he's the best candidate in the American election filled with neocons, while still pointing out where he's wrong ideologically and continuing what we're doing, educating and organizing training people ideologically and using Cornel West's interviews to train people ideologically.
Real quick, just one more thing on it. It's also a matter of respect, right? Like calling it the People's Republic of China and saying the Politburo or Standing Committee, because that's what they call themselves.
Mm. Yeah. It's I agree. It's tied. It has a similar effect as the demonization, demonization, which in general it's tied to a dehumanization of these people who see their autonomous life activity tied to the development of their People's Republic. I forget what I was going to say. Thanks, Noah.
Repression in their own context. Think about our precious Muslim brothers and sisters in China, the Uyghurs. But I would sit down with the Chinese. I would sit down with the Ukrainians. I would sit down with the Russians and say, we're going to stop this war and we're going to come up with a plan, a process with a variety of voices heard to make.
You should sit down with the coalition of Muslim majority countries who said that they support what China's doing in Xinjiang.
Mm-hmm.
Sure that the suffering stops and we understand.
I also don't know how well read he is on these issues. Like I get upset and we get upset, but my thing is geopolitics. He's a philosopher and he still needs to know this stuff. He still needs to be more on point with this stuff, but hopefully, maybe this is me being naive, but hopefully as he gets more well read on it, he'll shift his positions a bit.
And we're honest about the larger context of the war. And unfortunately, we just don't get.
I remember what I was going to say, that the cringe thing is that some Amy Goodman cult follower is probably watching this like, wow, he's very nuanced. He's calling these people empires. He's calling him a gangster. He calls it how it is. I mean, yeah, it's a kind of cringe, but yeah, we have to be participant in this thing. Hopefully, when he goes to a different audience, he doesn't use that language. Maybe that'll help us assess whether it's just to appeal to the Goodman and Democracy Now! Viewers or not.
This kind of perspective, in corporate media. Thank God for Democracy Now! And thank God for a few other venues that try to tell.
Democracy Now! Is corporate media.
Yes, Sister Amy, that I am. I'm a jazz man in American politics, and jazz is about blues, and blues is about catastrophe, lyrically expressed and candidly confronted and artistically transfigured. And catastrophes have to be wrestled with. It can be ecological ones. It could be economic ones of grotesque wealth inequality. It can be social ones, political ones, psychic ones. And then there is swing, which is a different conception of time. So we have ways of authorizing a better future given what seem to be all of the closed roots, all of the foreclosures, all of the alternatives trumped. So you have to make sure that the vitality and energy that you have swings in such a way that you never lose hope in having solidarity with oppressed people around the world. And of course, the third element is improvisation. And improvisation is about what? Well, it's not just an artistic skill. The Ron Carter's geniuses like that still alive remind us. It's also a form of practical wisdom. As freedom fighters, we got to be improvisational. We got to be flexible. We got to be fluid. We got to be protein. We got to learn how to listen. We can't be dogmatic. We can't be ossified. We can't be petrified in how we look at the world. And right now, we have to have presidential debates and politics in which people who look at the world through the lens of what the great Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth.
Cornel
Poor
West.
people and working people, no matter what color, gender, sexual orientation, national identity, or region.
Cornel, you were a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. In fact, in 2016, he chose you as one of the people to write the Democratic Party platform. Have you talked to him about your campaign, you deciding to go outside the two-party system? He ran although he is an independent and a socialist, he ran inside the Democratic Party. And has he given you advice?
No, I haven't talked to Bernie recently. We just did a wonderful event based on his wonderful book with Brother John Nichols. There in Brooklyn Academy of Music. We had a wonderful time. Sister Jane and my beloved wife, Anahita, we had a wonderful time with him. And Bernie will always be my brother. I've got a forever love for that brother. We just have disagreements. I don't think he would be surprised, though, because I, of course, supported the Greens. Sister Jill Stein, after I supported him, just like I'd go back to the great Ralph Nader. And a lot of people try to view those two as spoilers. They're not spoilers at all. You had mediocre neoliberal candidates who could not galvanize the public, so you don't blame it on the weaker parties. And we will never actually be able to deal with the escalating fascism in America with milquetoast neoliberalism. You just end up with caretaker government. You end up with postponing the collapse of democracy, as my dear brother Jeff Stout says. You have to get at the roots of fascism, which means I'm going to Trump country, Sister Amy. I'm going to talk to those white brothers and talk to those white sisters and say, quit scapegoating the most vulnerable. Let us confront the most powerful. I don't have a minute for any kind of xenophobia, but at the same time, I know you're catching hell. I know many of you have been losers in corporate globalization. You've been pushed against the wall by big monopolies and oligopolies. You have difficulty trying to engage in any kind of unionization. You have to transform and transpose and filter your fears through different means rather than following a neo-fascist Pied Piper.
And that's why we support Cornel in this campaign, despite his flaws in foreign policy, everything he just said there. I mean, down to the part where he said we shouldn't be rigid, we should be flexible. You know, that's a dialectical way to look at things, but especially everything he said about getting to Trump country, you know, and how to talk to the white working class that feels abandoned by the neoliberals. And I'll say it again, 40% of this country doesn't vote. You know, so is it easier to work through the 30% of this country that considers themselves Democrats? We worked for Bernie. That was extremely difficult to convince them to vote for socialism. Or do you want to go to the independents and the Republicans and the Democrats and draw all these people into a broader movement? That's what I think a lot of people are missing. And it's a lot of people who maybe haven't had experience working, you know, on the ground, or especially on the ground in the Democratic Party, is they give you this app, the door knocking app, that only sends you to Democrats' houses, whether they're rich or poor or filthy rich, or they have no intentions of ever voting for a socialist. It doesn't matter. You're appealing to Democrats. And a lot of them, you'll talk to them and be like, but Bernie supports healthcare. But Bernie was there during the civil rights movement. But Bernie's the only one who's not taking corporate money. And they'll be like, well, I just kind of like Pete this year. And it's like, well, what the fuck? What do I even say to that? Well, but that's how a lot of upper middle class Democrats look at it, and that's, you know, who Cornel's saying his campaign isn't going to be focused on. It's going to be focused on the heart of America, not only marginalized communities and oppressed communities, but, you know, even the white working class. And not to say that all white working class Americans are Trump supporters, but, you know, he's going to reach out to everyone, all the marginalized people in this country, all the exploited people in this country. And that's why we think this campaign could be a huge galvanizing force for socialism in America.
And Marius is absolutely right here, and this is why he pisses off the synthetic left. Yeah, absolutely, because he's not willing to scratch these people off as a basket of deplorables in the same way that many self-proclaimed communists who are grounded in the purity fetish outlook have, because they consider these people to be too impure and irredeemable to be organized.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like Eddie just said, 40% of Americans don't vote. Of the 60 that do, how many voted Democrat or Republican because they thought there was no other option? Because they were voting for the lesser of two evils. So when you approach people based on class instead, you're drawing from all of those people from each of those numbers. Also, I just like Pete this year.
There was a upper middle class woman who said that to me, and I wanted to throw myself through a window.
You know, I was doing a canvassing for a union a while ago, and it was just like a very minor thing. And the guy started going on and on and on about fuck Mike Jones, right? And just Mike Jones, and so like 3 minutes past of this guy screaming at me, and I'm like, I think you have the wrong union. And so like when you base it on personalities like that, it's always that silly, right? Like this guy just yelling for 3 minutes about Mike Jones.
Oh God! By the way, there's a video of Chris Hedges in a forum with the Workers' Strike Back and Kwashama Stewart next to him, who I think he speculated that it would be cool to have her run as Cornel's VP. Some people said Nina Turner. Some people have said her. I think either one would be fairly cool. Do you guys want to react to this 2-minute video and then call it a night after that?
Perfect. Let's do it.
Is this off the record? I've been playing with my phone because I set up a meeting with Cornel and the Green Party for tomorrow morning because of the issues you just raised.
I missed what he said.
So that you would recommend a Green Party run in the alternative, or?
I'm recommending that the Green Party that Cornel runs as the Green Party candidate.
Yes.
I think you should pick Shama to run with him. Not a joke, by the way. But yeah, I share all your concerns, and just on the issue of ballot access, the People's Party doesn't have any. And I, having worked with Ralph in his campaigns, I saw all of the impediments most of the Democratic Party throws to make it impossible for a third party candidate from the left to run. And part of it was challenging his petitions, which were all legitimate, they challenged them in court. They ran up over $1 million in legal fees that Ralph had to pay. So, I mean, just all sorts of mechanisms. But I share all of your concerns. I mean, and I think that centering, Howie Hawkins, who I like very much. I mean, he ran not just as a Green Party candidate, he had other smaller parties, but he was also the candidate. I would like to see Cornel do the same.
Man, that's awesome to hear. I'm not surprised to hear from Chris Hedges, but.
And you know what the left is now saying, that Chris Hedges is trying to get Cornel to leave the People's Party and run for the Green Party. When that's I think clear, maybe there might be something I haven't seen yet, but from this clip at least, what seems to be implied is that the People's Party, he should also run through the Green. He should be on the ballot for the Greens where he can be. Which is and then he gives the example of Howie Hawkins, who was in the Socialist Party, but also in the Greens, and wherever one didn't have ballot access and the other did, he ran through the other one. And that sort of party coalition thing is not abnormal. It's like how most elections are done in places like Latin America, where socialist candidates are put on the ballot with a coalition party that's really a combination of 3 or 4 parties, maybe some social movements, and I think we can try to get that done with Cornel.
Yeah, I thought it seemed like it was clear that he was saying get him, because, the whole strategy, or maybe Chris Hedges was taking for granted that people knew this, but Cornel running this early allows the Green Party to endorse him and put him on their ticket, nominate him for the ticket. It seemed like that's what he was saying. I think he would have said explicitly he should leave the People's Party if that's what he was saying.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that goes to a lot of the people trying to throw in the towel for him before the race even begins. by going, but the People's Party doesn't have ballot access, as if he's not intimately aware of this situation, right? And they like assume they know everything about him, and they're just so brilliant. They've cracked why this guy who's been in this for decades longer than they've even been alive is just an idiot, and they're so smart, right? And it's just always so smug and gross with that stuff. But what I think is really cool about this is what it can signify for the future and everything else, because it begins that Latin American coalition style here in the US, and that has been incredibly successful.
Yeah.
I mean, PSUV, right? PSUV, the Chavistas, that's what they are, you know?
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this so many times. I'm not going to say we predicted it if it ends up happening, but we've said, if something's going to take root in this country, at least the form that we can see on the horizon is as a coalition, that it gets involved the unions, the most radical unions, some of the progressive and non-GMO bot social movements, and then the parties that come together on a common candidate and push forward candidates in various areas. And I think we could definitely, if we get the purity fetish and put it to the side, and we focus on actually advancing the class struggle and on having the interest, the immediate and the long-term interest of the working class at heart, I think there's no reason why we can't do that here in the U.S. and be successful doing it.
Yeah, and I think Venezuela is the best example because you had PSUV and PVC or PCV party, Venezuelan Party of Communists or whatever it stands for. Their Communist Party and all these other parties who aren't in total agreement on everything. The Communist Party in Venezuela is probably more in line with our ideology than the PSUV. Yet we support the PSUV and we support, the socialist movement in Venezuela and supported Hugo Chavez rise to power. Or they did at the time. So that's like the coalition we're trying to form here. And there's, like Noah said, it's been extremely successful in Latin America. It's basically what Bolivia is too. In this electoral socialist movement, that's what the movement for socialism, the MAS, isn't an explicitly Marxist-Leninist or Communist party. They're a party with deep, intimate connections to the communities, the workplaces, the indigenous people in the country, all the poor, marginalized, working class people in the country, and through their connections to the unions and through organizing class struggle and organizing communities and organizing for elections, even though some people are completely anti-election all of a sudden, they were able to bring a socialist to power in their country and do all sorts of things to raise the living standards of their people. So we're trying to replicate something like that here.
And it gets down again to the purity fetishists and why they're sort of learning Marxism, etc., any type of sort of progressive outlook in the first place. Are they doing it to, feel smart and act superior to everyone, or to genuinely get things done, right? Which requires this sort of thinking and ability to work with people who aren't Marxists or Marxist-Leninists. I've been studying Marxism-Leninism a very, very long time, right? I'm the first person to go, I don't give a shit if you haven't. If we can work together and get things done, then let's do it, brother.
Absolutely. Well, do you guys have anything else to add on that? I feel like we've kind of covered this in depth. We'll continue to cover the Cornel West campaign. I notice it's a hot button issue right now. I'll say this before I end. I forgot how easy it was to think up ideas for content, especially TikToks when there's an election going, which shows how this creates energy, and it puts attention on socialist politics. The Cornel West campaign does. And every video I make about it is getting at least 10,000 views and then over 1,000, well over 1,000 likes. And it's hard to think of topics that people are interested in at a sort of apolitical time, when you don't have a socialist running. So there's so many opportunities to use this to bring people into the movement and stuff. And realize that a lot of Americans only pay attention to politics every 4 years, and an election is a chance to reach the masses. And I get a little frustrated when I'm using this campaign to push Marxist-Leninist ideology very successfully on TikTok, And then I have people on Twitter like, why are you guys supporting Cornel? He's not a staunch Marxist-Leninist. Like, well, I'm using the campaign to push Marxism-Leninism. So what the hell are you doing other than complaining on Twitter, honestly? So